I've shared this experience a few times over the years, but after you've been called crazy so many times, you just start keeping it to yourself. Wayne, I enjoy all your podcasts, and that's why I'm sending my encounter to you. My name's Roger, and I'm from East Texas, not that far from the Big Thicket. The Big Thicket is actually where our hunting cabin's located. My father built it back in the 70s. It's nothing fancy by any means, but it's always a nice little place to get away to. There's no power or running water, but we put a generator out there in the late 80s, and we do have some food-grade containers to catch rainwater. That definitely made it a little bit more comfortable, but it's a place that you wouldn't want to stay for very long. The activity started pretty much as soon as we built the place. Strange vocals like calls and howls and whoop-type sounds and tree knocks. Eventually, that turned into rocks getting tossed at the cabin from time to time. Seems like my dad and Uncle Bobby always played everything off. They had an excuse for everything that happened. I think that they knew those things were out there, but they didn't want to scare us kids. Anyway, time goes on and weeks turn into years, and before you know it, nobody's been out to that old cabin in a couple of decades. That's when I decided to try my hand at renovating it. My dad passed away in 2014 and left the property to me and my brother. Neither of us wanted to see it go to waste. It always reminded us of the great times that we had with Dad and Uncle Bobby. It was spring of 2015 when my brother Kenny and I decided to head out there and have a look to see what was in store for us. It was in surprisingly good shape. We were tickled to see that it was not only standing, but it was fairly solid. There were a couple of windows that had been broken out, but other than that, we really couldn't complain. All the old furniture and bedding was still in there and was going to need to be replaced, but it was definitely worth sleeping there. We brought our camping gear thinking that we'd have to sleep there for at least a couple of days. It was nice to see that we were going to have a roof over our head for the nights. We got to looking around the property and we walked a little ways into the woods. We didn't have any neighbors for miles and we wanted to get a feel for the property because we hadn't been there in years. We followed a game trail for about a half a mile, and that's when we found the first track. It looked like a huge bare human footprint. All of the memories of the sounds and the rocks that were thrown at the cabin came flooding back. Ken and I just stood there and looked at each other. He broke the silence when he said, "Are you effing kidding me? Are there effing Bigfoot here?" He seemed almost happy at the thought of it. But then again, he's always been a big weirdo. He loved Bigfoot stuff. He watched all the shows and movies on the subject, even had a Bigfoot sticker on the back of his truck. I, on the other hand, was not amused. I wasn't necessarily a non-believer, but I wasn't a believer either. I guess you could say I didn't care either way. He was as giddy as a schoolgirl. We spent a few more minutes looking around and then we decided to head back before the dark set in. We had no idea what kind of horror was waiting for us back at the cabin, though. On our way, we heard the first of several wood knocks, but we still had no idea what we were in for. We made it back to the cabin, but everything just felt different. The only way I know to explain it is that the air felt so much heavier. Ken was the first one to notice that the front door, which was perfectly fine before we went on our hike, now appeared that it had been kicked in. It was completely off the hinges. This was no cheap door either, not like the kinds that are mass-produced nowadays. This was an old, solid wood door that was built to last. As we started up the steps to investigate, I noticed the biggest turd I'd ever seen just laying on the bottom step. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but that's what it was. Something took a huge dump on our steps. Needless to say, Ken's fascination quickly turned to fear, and we decided right then and there that it wasn't worth it. We needed to leave. Luckily, we hadn't started to unpack, so everything was still in the truck. We jumped in and started down the driveway. Now, this wasn't your typical driveway in a residential neighborhood. This was about a mile-long, rutted-out dirt road that wound through the woods before ending up at the main road. About halfway out was when we ran into this huge tree that was now laying across the driveway. Again, just like the door and the giant poop, it was not there just a few hours ago when we arrived. Something didn't want us to leave. I say something and not someone because it would have taken 10 grown men to move that tree. As we examined it, we noticed that it didn't fall there either. There was no disturbed ground and there was no root nearby. It hadn't fallen there. It was placed there. I'll be honest, at that moment, I've never been more happy to be a Texan. If there's one thing we take pride in here in Texas, it's our guns. Being that this was a hunting cabin and we intended to do some while we were there, we were pretty well armed. We were also lucky that we were there to work and we had our tools with us, which included a couple of chainsaws. We had no idea what we were going to run into once we got up there, so we came prepared. And now looking back, I truly believe that's the only reason we were able to get out of there that day. I had my .357 on my hip and my .30-06 on my shoulder, standing guard as Ken made quick work of the tree. I'd say it only took him about 10 minutes to cut it up and get it cleared enough for us to get through. But honestly, it felt like hours. I was on edge the entire time. It felt like we were being watched. Once we got the tree cleared out of the way, we loaded back up into the truck and we got the hell out of there without further incident. I'm sure some may say that this wasn't truly a Sasquatch encounter, given that neither Ken nor myself actually laid eyes on one. But I challenge anybody to tell me what else could it have been. Other than the smell of the shit log on our steps, we never smelled anything else, but all the other classic signs of a Bigfoot encounter were there. After that incident, we haven't been back to the cabin, and frankly, we haven't decided what, if anything, we're going to do with it. It's not like we paid for it, and neither of us really need the money. Honestly, I wouldn't feel right selling it anyway. I couldn't live with myself if we did and somebody got hurt, or even worse, killed out there. As far as I'm concerned, those big hairy bastards can have the place. I know that's a lot to take in, and it's not the scariest or most intense encounter you've ever heard, but it does speak to the possible behavior of these creatures. In my opinion, after we went through that day, these things are not the friendly forest giants that you can have a relationship with. These things are smart, and they do not want to be messed with. I can certainly tell you I, for one, am going to be giving them their space, and I suggest everybody else do the same. Well, there you have it, Wayne. That's the truth about what happened to me and my brother up in East Texas. I can tell you, man, they're here, and they are mean as hell.